Hello, everybody. I'm Ellie Black. It's nice to see you all here. Thank you for coming out. This is the release and reception for the 2017-18 Aonian. If you don't know, and you just decided to come, thank you for coming, first of all. And second of all, this is Hendrix's Literary and Arts magazine. It is entirely student-run, student submissions. We accept submissions from all students, and we make them into a magazine. It comes out every April. I have been editor for 2 years, and this is my final year as editor. This is my final reception. I have been to every one. So this is kind of a bittersweet occasion for me, but I'm very, very excited that we're gonna release this new edition to you guys today, right now, actually. So what I'm gonna request is that you guys all stay in your seats, but if all my staff members could please stand. Yes, please give a hand. I was gonna actually ask for you to do that, so thank you. So what's gonna happen is that you are all going to stay seated, and my staff is going to go back to that black table, take the black sheet off of the table, and bring you some Aonians. So we're gonna do that. Does everybody have one? These will be necessary for the purposes of the reading, so. All right, cool. So let's go ahead and get started once all the staff is seated again. I will wait for the staff. But yeah, take a look. I think this is a very beautiful edition. I think I'm very proud of it. The cover. The theme this year is gemstones, if you cannot tell. And I will explain that at the end. I will read my editor's note, and it will all be explained. All right, so I guess we are going to begin the reading. We're going to start with third place, move to second place, and go to first place. Finally, we're going to do all the genres in each place. And we're going to start with third place poetry. Our third place poetry winner is staff member Kaitlin Lowe. She's coming up right now for her poem Conversation Topics, and that is on page 22. So please flip to page 22.
Okay, I'm not exactly sure myself how to read this, but I'll just improvise. Okay, conversation topics. It took 7 hours to see you. I think the last time there was a death in the family. I knew you didn't know I was going to be there, and I've never been so nervous. So I thought of conversation topics. I watch the same show you do, about zombies, because you do. I learned to play the same instrument you do, a vain attempt to be like you. I have the same laugh as you, a loud one, I've never noticed until now. You said 6 words to me that night, I counted. A hi and a goodbye and a good to see you. I felt like a stranger feels, alone. I was in your house, but not at home. I figured it out since then. I have the same dad as you. I think you're trying to forget him and I am not helping. But I wish you wouldn't blame me for a mistake I've not made. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kaitlin. I particularly love that poem. I think that's a beautiful poem. I've never once in my life seen a poem that looks like that ever. And so when that was submitted, I was like, this is crazy. I love this. So I was very excited to see it. Next up, we have our third place fiction winner, which is Trey Dyer for A Public Denial on page 52. Please flip to page 52. Trey, are you here? Want to come read? All right.
Hi. This is A Public Denial. Jimmy's father said to come by the church. They should have a talk. Everybody knows what that means. And when I say everybody, I mean everybody. Nothing stays a secret for too long in this town. Martha down at the library is the linchpin of the rumor ring. Yes, the Martha who ripped her pants at last year's Thanksgiving potluck. No one checks out the newest edition of Biblical Digest without hearing who skipped church to visit their son in prison or how young Mr. McDaniel's new wife is. She's 28. No, Jimmy's talk with his father was no quiet affair. In fact, the whole idea of a talk was conjured up by the Women's League, the chapel choir, the book club, with Martha leading the charge, and half of the city council. Jimmy, who was never too popular, has been the talk of the town ever since he skipped the annual retreat that the youth group puts together. It wouldn't have been such a big deal if he hadn't moseyed on through town the day after he told everyone he was sick in bed. After that, it was not bowing his head during prayer. Then it was wearing black just a little too often. No, not the stylish black. It was the look at all the black I'm wearing black. The town never put two and two together, though at least they never wanted to. They refused to believe Jimmy was the A word. No, not asshole. Well, maybe. He was an atheist. It was simply not possible. Nothing like this had happened to this small town since they mistakenly printed a version of the local paper in which the editor accidentally published a letter to his ex-wife who left him years ago. It was not a pleasant letter. No one even thinks to call Jimmy an atheist either. That's a dangerous game around here. Martha's Ring accused a new family who moved in last February of heresy, but it turned out they were only Methodist. Suffice it to say, the Jacksons moved out 2 months later. The real reason no one could slap the scarlet letter on his chest was because Jimmy's father was the pastor. As a normal parent, Jimmy's father was the last to catch on to any unusual behavior. It was only after a few anonymous notes with subtle messages were left in the mailbox reading, "Your son is a sinner," that Jimmy's father understood what was happening. If you attended any league meeting, choir rehearsal, or council session, you would know who sent those letters. So Jimmy's father said to come by the church. They should have a talk. That's why Jimmy is at camp and why we don't chat with Martha anymore.
Thank you, Trey. That's the second time that I've heard that one read. I first heard it read at Word Garden a few months ago, and I actually solicited it from Trey. I was like, would you please submit that to the Aonian? And I'm very glad that I did that. Let's see. Next up, we have our third place nonfiction winner, which is In a Gulf by Callie Summerlin. Callie, are you there?
In a Gulf. Before we leave for the trip, my mother spends an hour on our dinosaur computer, looking up cases of flesh-eating bacteria. It's not like Sandestin, she says, meaning the fancy resort in Florida we visit in the summer. The water is dirty. She pulls up article after article on badly designed local news sites, reports of people rushed to the emergency room after spending time in the water of the Mississippi Gulf. It's true that the water looks dirty there, muddy and thick in a way that the clear waves of Florida are not. The water that splashes up against the shoreline carries a brown tint. It kisses up towards piles of sand that seem gray in the sunlight, littered with McDonald's cups and empty whiskey bottles. A handful of people sit in beach chairs set out in the sand, but the water itself is empty save the distant silhouettes of fishing boats. They rise from the horizon, an almost ominous sight from the backseat window of my mother's Honda. The interstate shoots along the beach, nothing but a line of shabby palms and flattened dunes separating us from where the land disappears into the Gulf of Mexico. On the other side of the car, my sister looks out at hotels and casinos, topped off with glowing signs and giant palm trees lit up in neon. I watch children fill buckets with water to use on sand castles and wonder if their mothers know that the sea is full of deadly bacteria here. Still, part of me wants my parents to pull the car over so I can jump in after them. The water, even if it is smelly and brown, seems to lap up against the bright blue sky and the endless way only the sea can. If I strain over the crackle of the radio, I can imagine I hear the soft waves creeping onto the shore.
Thank you so much, Kelly. And yeah, I believe for the longer pieces, winners are just going to read excerpts. You can read however much you want as long as it's under 10 minutes. I told that to some people, but not to some people, so now you know. Next up, I believe we have our third place visual arts winner, which is Christina Santner, another staff member, for Alice Fears What's Been Lost. That's on page 95.
Hello. So I'm Christina. This piece is part of a larger series that I did called Through the Rabbit Hole. And really what it was about for me is I was making it kind of around the same time that I was working on my senior thesis, and so I really wanted to have kind of like a less stressful project that I was working on and something that would allow me to experiment and to play in a different way than I usually do, and especially in a way that I wasn't getting to do as I was really narrowing in on my thesis. So all of the images in that series were created using photograms, which is a photographic process where you place like three-dimensional items on top of the photo paper and then expose them so the shadows of the object get recorded on the paper. And so for me, as I was making these images, I was trying to think about the act of playing and the process of kind of creating and exploring, but especially I was trying to work with personal narratives from childhood and kind of re-examining the toys and the figures and the stories that I thought about a lot as a kid through new eyes as an adult, while still finding a way to interact with them in a playful way. So thank you.
Thank you, Christina. Yeah, we published 4 from that series, and I think they're all very nice. Next up, we have our second place poetry winner, Michelle DeLouise-Ashmore, another staff member, for her poem, It Was the Summer. I believe that's on page 61.
So this was a piece that I wrote after a piece by Neil Hilborn, which was a piece that he wrote after another poet, Hugh Min Win. So it was the summer. I ate nothing but apple slices and eggs, hard-boiled, lightly salted. It was the summer of forgetting, the summer of scrubbing my tongue until it bled, trying to get that taste out of my mouth. I can't remember if this was the summer I spent every night drinking myself into a hole, but I do remember this being the summer I began opening my bedroom window again, the katydids chitter drowning out the thoughts of that boy still stuck on the tip of my tongue, even though I never wanted him there in the first place. It was the summer we pretended that night had never happened. We pretended I'd said yes the entire time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Michelle has many pieces published in the series Aonian. They're all very beautiful. I recommend that you read them all. Let's see, next up we have our second place fiction winner, which is Disheanna Brown for How to Be a Mistress Trained in the Art of Extramarital Affairs. Disheanna. 23.
So how to be a mistress trained in the art of extramarital affairs. Entice a hot, gullible man, preferably rich, from a simple, demure wife with the invitation of sex. Achieve this by wearing a red, open-back dress that shows a little dip above your butt that signals to him all the bendable ways you can contort your body in bed. Accidentally bump into Mr. Handsome at the grocery store. Call him Mr. Handsome. Flirt, but not too much. Play hard to get, play hard to catch, play with his emotions. Tease him till you hear a knock at the door at 1 in the morning. Open the door to find him there. Inquisitively ask him why he is there, drenched in rain and eyes spilling over with desperation. Eyes full of need and wanting love, your love, the kind of love only you can give him. The illicit kind, not from his wife, but from the dangerous, heart-pumping, chest-pounding, thrilling kind of love. That is what he tells you on the cusp of the doorway, drenched from head to toe. Give him a little smirk. Pretend to think twice about your decision. Invite him in for a cup of coffee and a towel. Help him dry up. Help him dry up passionately all night long. The next morning, make him breakfast. Tell him to keep your relationship a secret. Tell your best friend about your new rekindled love. Change your hair to match his wife's hair, blonde with brown highlights. Copy her style, wear the same A-line dresses with nude pink toe heels and red lipstick. Wear her same rose-scented perfume that reminds him of responsibility and home. Because before he was hers, you used to date in college, and before he noticed you, he was your secret love. Before she separated you, before he broke your heart and fled to the safety of her arms and her father's money. Insist that he call you Evelyn. Tell him you love him. Tell him you love him every time you meet, every time you and him are making love on the floor passionately. Tell him in the most breathless voice possible, letting each syllable flow between your shared breaths, before moving on to the next one. Let your words travel on air, across town to his home, so that when he is in bed with his wife, then sing him to sleep. One afternoon, go to the park. Watch his wife playing happily with their 3 little girls, Sarah, Molly, and Hannah. Fantasize about what your life could have been, should have been. Send yourself some flowers. Hell, send yourself a whole damn box of chocolates with his best friend's name on the card saying, "Can't wait for tonight." Have it arrive when you're not there. Beg his forgiveness. Do this to keep him interested so that he will stay. Do this to keep him tangled in your love web. After, befriend his wife at the local women's book club. Have brunch with her. Tell her that her husband is cheating on her with someone very close to her. Tell her it is you. After, go to a bar filled with Stratus-like cigarette smoke and the smell of desperation. Order 2 martinis and relish in the sweet taste of satisfaction.
I think that piece is wonderful. I think it's hysterical and very frightening, and I love it. And I think that nobody could read it in precisely the way that Disheanna does. I love it. Let's see. Next up, we have our second place nonfiction winner. I believe just an excerpt is going to be read from this. This is another staff member, Joy Spence, reading her piece, Homemaking, which is on page 54.
I'm going to start on page 55. It just goes through 3 different places. So at Houston, Texas. I went home after Hurricane Harvey. We pulled in front of a house in our old neighborhood. The innards of the house had bled onto the yard. Chairs, tables, and stuffed animals were piled on top of sopping mattresses. We snapped on particle masks and gloves. My dad started walking towards the screen door, and my mom, sister, and I followed. 2 volunteer workers stepped out of our way as we walked through the door. My dad waved. After we walked in, I realized that they were the homeowners. We never met them, but stood awkwardly inside of their living room, waiting for them to return. It was as if, in its devastation, the property became public. Their home smelled like rotten wood. The air felt thick. Even through the mask, you could taste the must, seemingly feel the spores coat your lungs. My dad had stayed up coughing all night the night before. Sheetrock was cut in jagged edges 2 feet up from the hardwoods, leaving wooden stilts. A fan blew white noise through the house. My sister and I made our way into one of the bedrooms on our own, unsure of what to do. Landon was spelled across the far wall. Inside the bedroom, Nerf pellets were sprayed across the floor. The frame of her son's room was still intact. He had an array of books on the shelves, just out of reach of the water. It felt strange to look at his things, so I tried to pick up the Nerf pellets, hesitant to touch anything else. The husband finally joined us. He carried out we carried out the boys' mattress, our faces craned away from the damp upholstery. His wife stayed in the kitchen, hardly talking, trying to figure out how to pack each dish into boxes that we could carry out. Later on in the afternoon, I rode in the car back to the storage unit with the woman, air conditioned spinning on our clammy faces. Looking out the window, she remarked that she didn't see the inside of her house after the flood. It filled with 2 feet of water, and her family evacuated. When they came back, crews from church were already trudging through the house. They'd taken out furniture and photos, thrown them into a pile in the front yard. She was unable to see what the water had done. I watch her, wondering if this is the first time she is saying any of this out loud. She seems interested in her own words, almost surprised by them. Houston, Texas. My grandmother's apartment is on the 17th floor of her building. The far wall is almost all double-pane glass. She watched the 72-hour storm on an IMAX screen. We sat at her kitchen table. I'd made myself a sandwich. She watched me and twiddled her thumbs, telling me about the quilt she put together during the flood. Despite the tragedy, she seemed happy to have someone inside her space. I could already feel the respite from being up high, away from the destruction. The quilt on her bed was new, and her bathroom was redone. Whenever I go to her house, she has always made small changes in the space. New paint, new pictures, new decor. Sometimes the style will have changed from beachy to austere red and black. Ever-changing are the pictures. She used to have a wall of photos of her and her husband, one for each year of their marriage, 50 in total, on the wall. When he died, she took them down. Her style of decoration is always moving, growing, changing. Nothing is stagnant or significant except the pictures of her grandchildren on the wall, frozen at 5 years old. From the bus, the yards in Oxford do not really seem to be yards at all, just concrete entrances. The city seemed concerned with utility over space or comfort. However, as I wove down the sidewalk on a run behind the protective glass of my bright American athletic wear, my music from home, my running routine, the neighborhood started to lose its grayness. I noticed that there were flowers everywhere, dahlias and tulips, flowers with orange and red spikes, which I'd never seen before, even sunflowers and cherry tomatoes. I turned down little roads and marveled at the variety. Each 5 by 10 yard, the size of which had originally scared me, became a little square of self-expression, a patch to decorate. Each plant species chosen and planted, each chair or glassware tied to a memory. My neighbors' humanity seeped out of their choices, their attempts at artistry. The cobblestone and brick of the city became simply a different, not better, choice than any of the stone in my own cities. The neighbors had painted Yard of the Month on a table stacked on a 13-foot pile of furniture in their yard. White kitchen chairs, an ornate wooden dresser, and rolls of carpet crumbled on top of each other. I stopped, dabbing the sweat off my stomach with my shirt. Lots of the furniture still seemed usable, and I felt slightly guilty, mentally looting someone's house. They had good taste. Their furniture looked expensive, even piled on the street. Later on in the afternoon, I peeled off from the house we were volunteering at and drove by my old neighborhood, my most recent house, with my dad to get gas for the car. From our view on the street, we could see only fences, not yards. As we turned into the station, everything looked intact. However, I looked closer through the gaps of the fence at one of the houses across the street. Shoes, clothes, furniture, and bed linen were spread across the backyard. For some reason, this hit me harder than any of the mold or destruction. The life they'd constructed, strung up on a clothesline, set out for everyone to see. At the end of the summer, I stood in the bare room of my apartment in Conway. Someone would be coming by soon to check inside my cabinets and sign my room agreement. I picked up the final grocery bag of odds and ends inside my house and walked through my bedroom again to see if anything was left. The day before, my walls were filled, wrapping me in a patchwork blanket of decor. Today, they are stripped. As I scooted the stilts of my bed out of the way to check for dust, I found a crinkled butterfly. It must have fallen off of my candle where I'd placed it, behind my bed. Perfectly intact, its black and orange wings left dust on my hands. It would have been my only mark on the room. I wondered what the next occupant might have thought when they found it, who they might have guessed had lived here.
Thank you so much, Joy. Joy won the President's Medal this morning, so if we could give her a round of applause. Congratulations, Joy. I will actually say, I forgot to mention this, because sometimes I do forget to say the page numbers. There is this handy-dandy page for the winners of the contest that you can refer to, and then it just has the winners on it and their page numbers. So if I do forget, then that is a reference that you have. But next up, we have Amanda by Geneva Hill. That is our visual arts second place winner. Is Geneva here? She couldn't make it. Do you want to talk about it? You don't have to. I'm just giving you the option. Yeah, I'll talk about it a little since I'm friends with Geneva. Kendra is Geneva's roommate and best friend, which is why I thought that she might want to talk about it. But Amanda's on page 60. This is a beautiful painting. We have 2 paintings like this. We also have Red Man by Chantal Daniluk, which I believe came from a painting class on campus where they were experimenting with red light. And I don't know much about art, but I have to say, I think this is just a stunning painting, so I'm very proud of Geneva for winning second place. Kendra, would you like to take her folder with her winnings? All right then, next up, I am honored to announce our first place winner for poetry, which is another staff member. His name is Liam Carey. He is right here in the front row. And he received first place poetry award from our judge, Nicole Brown, for his poem 60 Minutes Interviews Timothy McVeigh, bless you, which he is going to come up here and read.
"60 Minutes Interviews Timothy McVeigh. A line of ambulances ferries mummified bodies through a haze of shrapnel, flashing lights, and broken glass. The federal building is half ash, half intact. A timestamp in the margin reminds us that those who stumbled bleeding from their jobs died halfway to the hospital, that their pain is past tense. Today the studio lights are warm, revealing, forgetful. McVeigh is cold-eyed, soft-spoken, and completely recognizable. This is a man who bombs daycares. This is our neighbor, stinking of fertilizer and flame. 3 cluttered plates lie untouched on the coffee table. We huddle close, our eyes ripe with the same variety of fear. He talks calmly of the needle that he knows will stop his heart. This is easy, he says, to die like this, so much easier than to suffer death at random. The sprinklers hiss and jerk outside. Questions echo and answers fail. The interview stalls. His prison becomes an afterthought. Bars blur in the background. His voice is in the air, bouncing from dish to dish. His words are underground, winding up through the soil, every syllable an insect burrowing networks underneath our feet. Hardwood feels less and less like native ground. Our eyes are wet with tears that never fall, a bitterness, a biting of our lips, a futile disappointment. We wanted a black hood pulled down beneath an untrimmed beard, documents revealing a network of foreign influences, anything but calm and clean cut. Dad is sitting still, his fists clenched, straining to forget this face.
Thank you, Liam. That is such a poem. I think that you will all agree it's very, very good. For full transparency's sake, Liam is also my boyfriend. Let's see. So next up, we have our first place fiction winner as selected by Kevin Brockmeyer. This is Pink Nose and Purple Heart by Susannah Stubbs. It starts on page 76. I believe she's just going to read an excerpt.
Hi. I'm just going to read the second half of my story, and that starts at page 82 after the numbers. Okay. And just to catch you up, Nora Lee is the main character of this story. She's a veteran. Her husband is also in the military, and he's deployed right now. She's very worried about him coming home, and she's obsessed with making perfumes. A lot. So, minus 7 days, 14 hours, 36 minutes, 52 seconds. It was the third Sunday of Advent. In the Army Post Chapel, the mostly middle-aged praise band made a well-meaning but off-tempo attempt at contemporary worship. Meanwhile, the blue stained-glass windows did nothing to throw the accusing morning light from Nora and the girls as they snuck into the back of the sanctuary during the second song. The sermon came from Isaiah. Every warrior's boot used in battle and every garment rolled in blood will be destined for burning, will be fuel for the fire. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders. Nora wondered what Jesus would put all the soldiers to work doing when there was peace on earth, why the teenage boy sitting in front of her had showered in Abercrombie cologne that morning, and when she would see Jim again all at once. With a scrunching of the nose, she realized that this was the same pungent boy that had taken Jenna out on several dates, Andrew. His parents were in the Sunday school class that Nora and Jim had attended before he left. The chaplain prayed for all the troops everywhere, but especially in Iraq and Afghanistan, and as usual, he pronounced Afghanistan, which sounded ridiculous, but somehow gave him more credibility. Nora opened her eyes to slits to look at the chapel bulletin in her hands. It was printed on thick, odorless beige paper with military precision. On the back cover, in pristine Times New Roman font, was the prayer list, a litany of the family ofs. There they were in their usual spot halfway down the page, the family of Major Jim Owens. Nora knew that she should feel comforted by this, and in part she did, but there was a time when she hadn't been just the family of. Until her honorable discharge, she had been a fighter too, like Jim and so many of the men and women in these pews. But each Sunday they came to this chapel and talked about God's victory and never talked about the battles they had fought and sometimes lost, the ones they were still losing over and over. And all these things we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. The chaplain finished his prayer and with a benediction bid everyone to stand up and greet those around them. Nora watched all of the families of hug and laugh and tell each other they were good. How are you? The Herrera family did the most laughing. Captain Herrera had arrived back from Iraq just yesterday. His 3-year-old daughter bouncing in his arms, he towered over the rest of his little family. His black hair was in a fresh crew cut, and his corduroy sport coat had been resurrected from the depths of his closet. His eyes crinkled as he talked animatedly with the chaplain. Nora sent Imogen and Jenna off to their Sunday school class. Before she left to walk the short distance home, she stopped to use the restroom. As she swung open the squeaky door, the smell of bleach hit Nora with full force. About 15 hours after she was wounded, Captain Lee had awoken in a bright, sterile room with the smell of bleach holding her by the throat. A young soldier sat in a folding chair next to her, writing in his government-issue notebook. He was long-limbed, and even through the wrinkles and folds of his loose uniform, Nora could tell that if it weren't for PT, his arms and legs would be paper-thin. The honey-brown hair peeking from under his hat was military short, but just long enough to suggest that it had once grown in soft waves. He raised his bespectacled gaze to the olive-green cot as if he had been as if he hadn't been expecting her to be looking back at him. When they made eye contact, he stood, shutting his notebook with a snap. He had an awkwardness and an energy about him, like he was really an 11-year-old trapped in a 20-something's body. Hi, Captain Lee. I'm Lieutenant Owens. I'll be your nurse for the next couple of days. Hello, Lieutenant. Was I shot? Yes, ma'am, you were. We're going to keep you here for the next couple of weeks until we can arrange your way home. Then it's back to the States. You got any family? Nora's eyes widened. Did I shoot someone? Yes, ma'am. You took down one of the most dangerous insurgents in the city. You've got a Purple Heart coming your way, ma'am. The nurse had been adjusting Nora's IV. He let go of the tube running to her wrist when she raised both of her hands to cool her face. I killed that man. Lieutenant Owens returned to his chair and leaned forward, elbows on his knees, making a steeple from his long fingers. That man was responsible for the deaths of at least 40 people in the area. You saved so many lives by killing him. He shifted in his seat. You know, I haven't ever killed anyone in combat, but I've seen a few soldiers die under my watch. It's a strange feeling. Nora was silent. This was his first time being deployed, too. She could tell. They were both naive. All they had known about war before this came from movies and training in fake war zones constructed in American deserts. Nora had been living at Fort Irwin in California when Desert Storm had begun. When she returned to that desert, it felt too familiar. She was given honorable discharge and a Purple Heart, and she bought a German Shepherd and moved away from the desert, up to San Francisco. It was just 8 months later that she had gone to a support group for Desert Storm veterans on a nearby post and noticed a familiar face in the circle of chairs. It was Lieutenant Owens. He looked even gawkier in cargo shorts than he had in his uniform. They went out for drinks after the meeting, and they married the following November. Minus 0 days. Wait. Yeah, sorry, this is confusing. Minus 0 days, 3 hours, 44 minutes, 27 seconds. Late on Christmas Eve, the last hours of Advent quietly drew on. The moon was just a sliver away from fullness. The 2 windows in front of the Owens' small house glowed, and the girls and their mother cast moving shadows in the yellowish rectangles as they prepared for one more evening meal. The twinkling Christmas lights crowning the house whispered with a less holy message than the others on the block. The boyfriend, here he comes. Dinner was mostly the clinking of silverware and Nora asking Jenna's beau polite questions. Andrew had auditioned for the role of Banquo in Macbeth, and he was thinking about joining the army as an engineer. He shot searching looks across the table at an unusually quiet Jenna, but her eyes flitted away. So, Mrs. Owens, I heard you're really into perfume making. Is that like a hobby for you, or do you sell them? Nora wondered how much Andrew actually knew. No, I guess it's more of a hobby, not a business. I just like having them around. What's your favorite one you've made? The kid was making a valiant effort at conversation. Nora chose an obvious answer. Well, I really like the Christmas scent I made a while back. Oh, that sounds really nice. What does it smell like? Jenna cocked her head at her mother and interjected, Yeah, Mom, what does it smell like? You've never let us smell any of your stuff before. The thing is, they're not really perfumes. They're more like scents I've made that capture certain memories for me, Nora replied. I think it's just better if I keep my work to myself. Come on, Mom, just let us try it, said Jenna. I really don't think that's a good idea, Jenna, said Nora. Leave it, Imogen whispered to her sister. Jenna lunged for the labeled vial on the shelf behind her and started unscrewing the lid. Stop! Nora stood and her silverware fell to her plate with a shattering sound. Nora registered the shock on Andrew and the girls' faces and sat back down. Jenna replaced the bottle slowly. I'm sorry, said Nora. I'm sorry, Mrs. Owens, Andrew mumbled, eyes facing downward. Andrew was the last person to speak until the group walked to the chapel for the Christmas Eve service. They stood in a row, singing, with candles casting nervous flickers over their faces. Minus 0 days, 0 hours, 0 minutes, and 9 seconds. Midnight. The minute came and passed. Jesus was born for what felt like the first time, but was really the 1000th, and parents nestled their drowsy children back into their coats. Nora, the girls, and Andrew slowly made their way down the aisle to leave. Nora! It was Captain Herrera. He must have already gone outside, and for some reason had come back in. He hurried towards her from the front doors, out of breath, flecks of snow fading from his dark coat. I think you and the girls should go outside. All right, then, said Nora with a polite smile. The girls followed her to the doors, silent and still feeling the weight of the night's earlier conversations. Nora heard voices behind the large wooden doors. She pushed them open. "Dad!" the girls exclaimed. Jim stood on the church steps in his uniform. Before he could say any words of greeting, Nora rushed him, and his arms swallowed her and squeezed her so tight she thought she might just disappear, just become a part of him. Her monolith Bible was still cradled in her arms, and she was cradled in Jim's, the book's heavy but soft form pressed between both of their sets of ribs. Nora didn't mind. Finally, all of the holes in her memory of his scent were filled. Summer rain, soap, lawnmower clippings, smoke, and new mulch. How could she have forgotten? There were new notes to his smell now, but she pushed them to the back of her mind. Jim was home. Nora tore herself away from him to let Jenna and Imogen receive their bear hugs. They came home with drooping eyelids and cold cheeks aching from smiling. Nora and Jim sent the girls up to sleep so they could prepare things for the morning. Nora went into the kitchen to make some decaf coffee for herself and Jim, and he followed, holding her by the hand. The hand dropped as he saw the mess of bagged plants and soil and vials on the island. "Nora, what is all of this? Some kind of project?" "It's nothing. It was just something to pass the time while you were gone. Perfume making." Nora could feel her cheeks flush. Their nose stayed cold. She took off her knit hat and laid it on the counter, looking down as she flattened it out with her hands. After a moment, she whispered, "I didn't know if you'd come home." Jim wrapped her in his arms again and kissed her for a long time. A new memory, thought Nora. The smell of the coffee mixed with the smell of Jim and the smell of winter clothes that had been outside for long enough to absorb the air around them. When he let go of her, though, Nora noticed Jim eyeing the kitchen counter. On Christmas morning, the girls woke up to presents under the tree and a clean house. The dining room shelves were emptied of the glittering bottles, the kitchen no longer a makeshift perfumer's lab. They were all together, sprawled amidst a paper avalanche of red and silver in their pajamas as the morning dawned stark and bright. Minus 298 days, 12 hours, 43 minutes, and 5 seconds. Spring was coming, the snow was gone, and Nora and Jim nestled safe in their flannel sheets. Nora opened her eyes. Jim's wavy brown hair had grown out from his usual crew cut, and his face looked blankly serene as he slept. Nora felt a twinge of envy. She still hadn't figured out how to go to sleep at night. Nora carefully untangled her cold feet from his and slid out from under his arm to seek some sort of nocturnal activity. She put on her slippers and deep blue robe and meandered the darkened house. She dodged boxes in the hallway. The only thing on the shelves in the dining room was a framed picture of the four of them grinning, pink nose on the steps of the church. When the girls' semester ended, they would all be moving somewhere warmer, where it never snowed. It was 3 a.m. Nora found herself standing at the island in the kitchen, staring at the arrangement of scarlet tulips that Jim had surprised her with last week. Nora had found some work with a local bakery. Jim had placed the tulips in the kitchen, and she had found them when she came home from her first early morning shift. They still smelled faintly sweet. Minutes passed. She found herself standing on a chair, peering into the very top of the pantry. A panel in the back corner of the top shelf slid open to reveal a box of minute rice. She had learned to be more careful. She opened the riceless box, reached in, and pulled out a small glass bottle that had originally held vanilla extract. Nora had finished her project in secret after Jim's return. She had thought, why wait and worry for Jim to come home every time he leaves? Now that she had bottled his smell, she had Jim whenever she needed him, and without the new smells he had come back with, the smells that had sunken into his skin, that reminded her too much of the lively, deadly streets that she had patrolled nearly 2 decades ago. She sat on the couch in the living room now. She held her bottle in her hands like it was some sort of magic potion and watched it glimmer in the passing headlights of a car through the window. Then she unscrewed the tiny red cap and inhaled. Nora saw flickers of sunlight, heard rock music radio blaring, and felt fingers interlacing with hers. She saw mischievous smiles and paint flying and Japanese characters blurring by in neon. She touched rough stubble and soft plaid shirt collars, and the snowflakes touched her with startling, gentle coldness. Jim's voice said, "Hi, I'm Lieutenant Owens. Do you want to get drinks after this? If people ask, can I tell them you're my girlfriend? Will you marry me? Do you think we're ready for a kid? Do you think you can handle this on your own? How are things back in America? Are you all right? Are you sure you're all right? I love you." Nora smiled with her eyes closed and felt prickles down her spine at how real it all felt. A salt-smelling tear or two brushed her cheek, then her chin, then the blanket as she wrapped it around herself and curled into a ball and drifted to sleep.
Thank you so much, Susannah. Next up, we have our first place nonfiction winner, which is On Orange Forests and Mines by Sarah Weems, another staff member. I will note that this piece also won first place at the Southern Literary Festival this year, so congratulations to Sarah. Where are you? Oh, there you are. And this is on page 34.
On Orange Forests and Mines. You are 5 years old, standing in the woods with your father, still like observant deer. The sun has gone down, but the sky is still a deep blue, which you can only see through the black lace of the lush spring trees. The air is thick with Arkansas Ozark humidity and frog song, until the heavy drone is broken by cheerfully lonesome chants. Whip-poor-will, whip-poor-will, whip-poor-will. You hear how close it is, your father whispers. You've never seen the whippoorwill before, the bird that returned every late spring to sing you to sleep, the bird that said summer was here. You and your father are breathless and mesmerized until he takes a few steps forward, rustling the leaves that carpet the ground. Your hand is in his when the sudden sound of panicked fluttering wings startles you, and the flash of tan feathers rips the air out of your lungs. Beginning in 1961, 19 white herbicidal mists cascaded from United States military planes onto the jungles of Vietnam. To flush out Viet Cong guerrilla fighters from the dense jungles, the opposing side opted to simply wipe out the trees. After an initial spray, the leaves from the trees would fall, leaving their limbs unclothed until the next rainy season, as long as the tree survived, that is. A tenth of the trees didn't. The ones that endured were sprayed again and again until they finally gave out. Napalm fires took care of much that remained, the raging orange flames eviscerating the verdant foliage into gray ash. The white mist was coined Agent Orange, named for the color of the bands around the barrels it was stored in. Your grandfather, a man that you have always feared but fiercely loved, will sit in the corner of his living room up the road from your house, skeletal and quiet, up until the day he dies. He hardly ever speaks to you when you're over at their house until it's time to leave. Go hug Poppy goodbye, your parents remind you, heading out the door of your father's parents' house to drive 2 minutes back down the hill to your own home. Bye, Poppy. You climb into his clinky armchair with him and wrap your arms around his neck, his whiskers prickly and his plaid flannel shirts fuzzy and worn. Your nose is overwhelmed by the smell of Listerine and tickled by the hint of tobacco that he had long ago promised your grandmother he had given up. You will realize that when you are older that there was a harsher smell on his breath than just Listerine and the faint remains of a Marlboro Red. Bye, Sarah Jane, he says quietly. It is a name only he calls you. You are 5 years old, perched like a wide-eyed parakeet on the living room love seat, your eyes flickering between your mother's face and the window as the world outside darkens. Have you wondered where Daddy is? She asks carefully. Her eyes droop with exhaustion and a pain you will not understand until much later, an exhaustion and pain that will linger in her face in daily tears for the next 15 years, visible behind even her outspoken, stubborn, and determined nature. You realize with a bit of surprise that no, you hadn't wondered where your father is. You hesitantly shrug, confused as to where your mother is going with this. Daddy's in the hospital and he may be there for a while. Daddy's sick? Yes. Daddy's very sick. The main component of Agent Orange is dioxin, a term referring to a chemical compound that is now known to be one of the most toxic substances on Earth. Dioxin is made of carbon, hydrogen, chlorine, and oxygen atoms, which bind themselves to proteins found inside the cells of living things. This can alter gene expression, something that not only affects the individual, but offspring as well. Dioxin bioaccumulates, meaning it travels through the food web, from soil to primary to secondary consumers, then back into the environment as the cycle of life crumbles bodies back into dust. It seeps into the ground, into water, into cells, an indestructible and invisible conjurer of sickness. Diseases such as diabetes, cancer, and heart disease have been linked to dioxin exposure, as well as endocrine disruption which interferes with the functioning of hormones. When your grandfather gets up to shovel to the kitchen, you make sure to stay out of his path. By the time you were born, he was almost entirely blind due to lack of diabetic care, but his acute sense of hearing is legendary. So is his temper. On Sundays, Mimi usually asks you to stay over after the two of you have gone to church together. She always serves toast with supper, which seems both homey and sophisticated to you. One of those Sundays, you heard your grandfather cursing at the top of his lungs at her while you cowered in the breezeway, hoping he didn't know you were there. You've gotten really good at being quiet. Now, Donnie, you hear Mimi try to speak back, voice shaking but resolute and well-seasoned. You could pick out only a few words muffled by the kitchen door. When she comes out of the kitchen, she looks at you and beams ear to ear, yet the usual youthful look in her clear blue eyes is dulled. Both of you pretend you hadn't heard a thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. I love that essay. I think that's an incredible essay. Let's see. I think we have our final winner coming up, and that is Greta Kresse. I believe, is that how you pronounce your name? Kresse. Greta Kresse. For her piece, Jonah, is our first place visual arts winner, and that is on page 75. So, Greta, if you want to come talk about it.
All right, thank you. Yeah, my name's Greta Kresse. I'm a freshman here, and I'm an oil painter, and I really love it. I try to do other things, but I always come back to oil painting. I created this piece last summer. I had just graduated high school, and so I was finally making art for myself, and fully for myself, and I have always been really interested in the figure and had to represent that in a way that felt really honest to me and to the model. So my friend Jonah modeled, and I think that she's really unconventionally beautiful, and I really loved how she looked, and so she sat for me for quite a long time, and there was like really beautiful natural light, and I just wanted to capture that. But yeah, just like having the figure and capturing that like kind of unconventional video. Also, the size was really important. It's quite large. It's 4 feet by 3 feet, so it makes it really impossible to ignore, and by having a medium that takes a long time and stuff, it seemed to give more value to the piece as well and to her. So yeah, thank you.
Y'all don't want your award money, I guess. All right, thank you so much, Greta. Well, before I let you on out of here, because that was our final winner, I want to talk a little bit about my time at the Aonian. As some of you know, I'm a senior. I'm about to graduate. President Satsui's back there, like, celebrating. He's like, she's gonna get out of here. I've been the editor of the Aonian for 2 years, and it's been an incredible experience. I was on the staff my sophomore year. I was like, I'll never be the editor. I want to tell the story of how I got this position. It was an accident. I meant to apply for the associate editor position, and I applied for the wrong thing. And then nobody else applied, so they were like, do you want to interview? And I was like, okay. I was a tiny, scared sophomore. But so yeah, I've spent 2 years doing this. I love it so much. This is my baby with my beautiful wife, Peyton Kaufman, my associate editor. And yeah, I wanted to read my editor's letter to explain a little bit of context about what our process was this year. Before the Aonian was the Aonian for many years, it was called Potpourri. The Aonian in its current form didn't exist until 1996, the year I was born. In fact, it's a few months older than I am. And here it has been over the past 21 years, growing and changing and learning, as I have. This year, I served my second and final term as the editor-in-chief of the Aonian, and I couldn't be more honored to see our 60th issue through. The inspiration for this year's visual theme, Gemstones, came from the use of diamonds as the traditional 60th wedding anniversary gift, in turn inspired by Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee. I think of this issue as our very own Jubilee, an occasion on which to celebrate the past and the future of our magazine, all the things we've done as well as the things we've yet to accomplish. As I pass the torch to next year's editor, I consider the time I've spent with the Aonian and the deep connection I feel with it. It's hard to give up something to which you've given years of your life. Still, I know the magazine will be in good hands. Every year, we all receive a book full of new, beautiful gifts, these gems, these shining things at which we love to look. Thank you.